There are three fundamental principles of beatboxing that I think are important for any sound: volume, clarity, and consistency. Now, don't worry about replicating any of the sounds that I'm about to do. Just try to understand things on a theoretical level. So let me explain those three principles. The first one is volume. Now, for most beginner sounds, volume comes from pressure between your tongue and your lips and your teeth and your cheeks and pretty much whatever is making the sound. So just try to find what's making the sound and then make those things touch harder. That'll generate a bit more pressure. So for instance, if you're doing a bass kick like this, then that's coming from my lips touching together. So if I wanted to make the sound louder, I just have to make sure they touch harder before I actually make the sound. So actually squeezing down, pretending like I'm squeezing on something. And then, for instance, if I didn't do that, if I did the opposite and I put less pressure, then the sound would be very weak. It would be like this. Just like that. Another example is to do a tongue click like this. So for that, it's my tongue and then the roof of my mouth. So if I just make sure that they touch harder, then I can make the sound a lot louder. So I can do this. And then again, if I made it really weak, then you're not going to hear it very well. So you want to make sure that you're doing everything nice and loud and that you have that pressure built up. For some of the sounds, you can actually even put your hand in front of your face and then feel the pressure. So like this, I can do my bass kick and I can actually feel the air kind of hitting my hand. That's a good sign that there is some pressure there. Now, there is a key difference here between singing and beatboxing. In singing, pressure primarily comes from the diaphragm. The diaphragm helps you support that air and push it through your vocal cords and help it come out. In beatboxing, the diaphragm can help sometimes to make a sound maybe louder or clearer, but it's not the basics. You need to have that mouth and that lip and that tongue pressure first. Otherwise, the diaphragm pressure is not really going to help at all. So you can kind of think of it like you're baking a cake. So when you're baking a cake, you need to know how to make the most basic cake ever first. So flour and butter and sugar and stuff like that. And then once you can build that cake, then you can move on to other cakes. So that basic cake is kind of like the mouth, lip, and tongue pressure. But then depending on the type of cake that you're making, you might want to decorate it with some frosting. And in this case, frosting is going to be diaphragmatic pressure. So sometimes you need the frosting for the cake to actually taste good. Sometimes you don't need any frosting and the cake is perfect on its own. And for any cake, you can add way too much frosting and it's going to be spoiled. It's not going to taste very good. So you need to be careful of adding too much of this frosting or adding it to the wrong type of sound. Otherwise, it's just not going to, it might sound very breathy and you'll also just get tired very quickly. Again, keep that in mind moving forwards, that you should have that mouth, lip, and tongue pressure first. And then depending on the sound, you can see if adding that diaphragmatic pressure will help or whether it won't. Now, I'll mention in this course when I want you to add a bit of diaphragmatic pressure, so don't worry, I'm not making you figure that out all on your own, but just assume by default that you don't need it. Most of the sounds will be just mouth sounds, as I'll call them. Mouth sounds is when there's no diaphragm involved. So anyways, get that mouth, lip, tongue pressure. That's going to make volume. The second principle is clarity. Now, what does clarity mean? It means a lot of different things in the way that I'm explaining it. Clarity means to cut out breathiness, cut out vocalizations or any vowels that you're saying. You should just be focusing on the consonants and cut out any secondary sounds. So make sure that it's just one distinct sound. Don't make any random other sounds along with it. Cut down on the duration as well of the sound. Keep it nice and short and clean. So that's what I mean by clarity, those kind of four subcomponents. So let me do two examples. For instance, I can take a PF snare. So that's like this. Oh, it's a little breathy today. There we go. That's a bit better. And then I can add a lot of breathiness, and then it won't be very clear anymore. So, for instance, That's really breathy. It's not clear at all anymore. And then if I cut down on that breathiness and I make the sound nice and short and clean, nice and short, nice and clear. So that's what I want you guys to understand as well. Another example that I can give about clarity is doing a really slow beat. How do you do a really slow beat while keeping things clear? So let's say I have a beat. It's like this. Something nice and simple. Now, if I were to slow that down, it's not going to sound like this. It's not going to sound like that's what it would sound like if you just slowed the video down on YouTube. But if you want to actually do the beat slower, each of those individual sounds, and I'll put a diagram up now, each of those individual sounds should still be the same duration, but they're just going to be spaced further apart. So it's going to be more like that. So that's just the idea that you should be cutting down on duration. What I'm doing here is that I'm applying principle number 2 by making sure that whenever I do a sound, whether I'm doing a really fast beat or a really slow beat, I'm making sure that each of the sounds is nice and distinct and clear, and in this case, short. Okay, and then the third principle is consistency. This means a lot of different things, again. Now, this might mean consistency in timing, because you're going to have to stay on a certain tempo without speeding up or slowing down. This is actually very important because, especially if you're a beatboxer for your acapella team, there are other people who are depending on you to stay on beat. It's going to be very tough for your team if you're either too slow or too fast, because if you're too slow, then people might not be able to hold out the notes as long as they need to. And then if you're too fast, then people might not be able to sing all the notes and the words really fast enough. So whatever tempo is written for your song, make sure you can stick to it. And that's really important for consistency. Consistency also means consistency in the tone or timbre of your sounds. So we'll see examples in the course about how you can make certain sounds maybe a bit darker or a bit lighter. And we've also seen that, volume can affect the tone too. So maybe sometimes you want to crank that volume knob down, but you want to be consistent usually for a good basic beat. Consistency also means consistency in breathing. So making sure that you can breathe without really messing up all of your sounds. For instance, if you just go like this, that's not really going to help anyone. So in this course, I'll talk about ways that you can add breathing into your beatboxing without messing things up and to keep things nice and consistent. All right, so those are the 3 fundamental principles that you should apply to every sound while you are beatboxing. Now, there might be some exceptions sometimes and maybe places where you'll want to break them intentionally, but that's later. That's for after you've learned them. Let's go over 2 case studies now and see how we can use these 3 principles and make some cool beats. So the first one, let's try and take Boots and Cats and apply these 3 principles. So if you haven't heard of Boots and Cats, it's just like a simple rhythm. If you ask any beginner to beatbox, they'll probably just do this for you. So it's just like boots and cats and boots and cats and boots and cat, boots and cats and baboons and boots and cats and boots and cats, just like that. Kind of annoying, honestly, for me. But anyways, it's not really nice to listen to because we're not applying those 3 principles. So if we apply those 3 principles, we can actually turn it into a pretty nice beat. So let's take the first principle, which is volume, and just make sure that, okay, every single sound that I make, let me try and make it louder by adding some more pressure. So I'll take boots and cats and boots and cats and boots and cats and just make it louder. Boots and cats and boots and cats and boots and cats and boots and cats. It's already just a little bit better just by making it a little bit louder. And then I can make it nice and clear, clarity. I'll cut down on all of the vowel sounds, vocalizations. I'll cut down on the breathiness, and then I'll cut down on the duration of each of those sounds and try to make them nice and distinct. So instead of boots and cats, boots and cats, boots, cats, boots, cats, boots, cats, boots, cats, And I made sure to do those sounds nice and consistently and not really let my breathing affect things. So I just took Boots and Cats and made it into an actual nice beat. All right, and so that was just the first case study. The second one is you can take literally any sound and then you can put it into a beat if you just apply these three principles. So, for example, you can take literally a cough or a sneeze and you can put it into a beat as long as it's loud and clear and consistent. So I'll do a sneeze. So a sneeze would be like this. Achoo! Achoo! Now I just need to make sure that it's loud. It was pretty loud, but the pressure is coming mostly from the ch sound, the ch. So I'll try and make that ch really, really loud. Achoo! 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 And then I'm going to make it nice and clear. That's the second principle. I'll cut out that vocalization there and cut out the breathiness and just make it, instead of chew, I'll make it ch. So, achoo, choo, 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 choo. And now, if I just make sure that I'm doing it consistently and that I can breathe, then I can add it into a beat. So for instance, just like that. So you can see how we can use these three principles and actually make some really good, interesting beats. Okay, so keep these principles in mind, and we're going to move on and learn some basic sounds. I'm high, I'm from outer space. I got monkey with the blood, evolution in my veins.